Why is a driver who was in free fall beginning to change the course of the championship with a single practice in Brazil? What did McLaren discover that could completely redefine the infighting between its two stars? To understand the magnitude of what Oscar Piastri achieved in Brazil, you first have to go back a few weeks and understand the environment that surrounded him, both inside and outside the McLaren pit. The 2025 season started with strong expectations for the Woking team. They had just won the Constructors' Championship in 2024, something that had not happened for more than 2 decades, and had put together one of the most promising duos on the grid, the young Australian prodigy Oscar Piastri and the increasingly established Lando Norris, who was already considered one of the figures of modern F1. But then came the downer. Austin and Mexico were 2 circuits that brought out Oscar's weaknesses. Not because of a lack of talent, but because of a deep conflict between his driving style and the conditions of the car on low-grip surfaces. While Norris, with his natural aggressiveness and sensitivity with the rear axle, found solutions with minimal adjustments, Piastri struggled to keep the car on the track, showing an increasing disconnection with the MCL39. Andrea Stella, team leader, went so far as to publicly declare that the Australian's problems were not structural to the car, but a matter of personal adaptation to the characteristics of certain tracks. And these types of statements, although seemingly technical, have a strong psychological impact on a pilot. The media narrative was also polarized. Where before there was talk of equality between teammates, now the conversation revolved around a Piastri who seemed to crumble right at the most important moment of the season, while Norris naturally assumed the leadership in points and confidence. Internally, McLaren could not ignore that the data showed a Norris increasingly dominant in qualifying and long runs, and a Piastri with a tendency to lose half a second in sectors where he usually made the difference. This difference in performance translated into a loss of leadership for Oscar in the general table. They arrived in Brazil separated by just 1 point, but the momentum was completely in favor of the British. The atmosphere in Interlagos was charged. For McLaren, it was time to confirm that its 2 drivers were still competing at the highest level. But for Piastri, it was a critical opportunity. More than scoring points, he needed to send a message. He wasn't beaten, he wasn't broken, and he was still a legitimate title threat. It is in this context that the only free practice of the weekend takes on enormous symbolic value. Because it wasn't just about adjusting settings or collecting data. For Piastri, it was his time for redemption. And for Norris, the challenge of maintaining his new position as a technical and competitive reference within McLaren. In that internal conflict, silent but evident, one of the most intriguing rivalries of the 2025 season was built. A rivalry not only of talent, but of styles, temperaments and driving philosophies that were now measured under the pressure of a championship at stake. Friday at Interlagos began as just another day of free practice. But from Oscar Piastri's first lap it was clear that what was at stake was much more than simple preparation for sprint qualifying. There was an urgency, almost a desperation contained in each of her curves. The Australian didn't just want to be fast, I needed to be. What seemed like just another session became a testing ground for a pilot in search of technical, but also personal answers. McLaren had worked intensely in the days after Mexico. The technical team, led by Andrea Stella and with Tom Stallard as Piastri's race engineer, had immersed itself in telemetry. They detected worrying patterns, a progressive loss of confidence in braking phases, difficulty in adequately warming the rear tires, and a differential that responded erratically to accelerator commands in low-speed corners. These problems, although technical, were amplified by Piastri's style, who tends to seek stability and precision rather than brute aggressiveness. For Brazil, they decided to apply a series of strategic changes, starting with a new differential configuration in the acceleration phase, adjustments to the braking distribution and a review of the engine map in race mode. Added to this was a subtle modification in the angles of incidence of the rear wing to find more grip without sacrificing speed on straights. The objective was clear. Give Piastri a car that responded more linearly to his driving and allowed him to drive with confidence again. The first 30 minutes of the session were a revelation. With hard tires, the compound that provides the least grip, Piastri managed to clock 1 minute and 10.193 seconds, beating Lando Norris by almost 3/10. This data by itself would have been interpreted as an anomaly, but the real value was in how it was achieved. In the second sector of the circuit, the most technical, where linked curves are combined with braking support, Piastri was unbeatable. There, where the car's sensitivity to balance is maximum, Oscar was not only competitive, he was dominant. From the wall, McLaren engineers took note. The radio between Piastri and Stallard reflected something that had not been heard for weeks: tranquility. There were no complaints about the rear axle, nor doubts about corner exit traction. On the contrary, in one of the most revealing messages from the practice, Piastri stated in a firm voice, "There is a lot more rear grip now." It was direct confirmation that the changes were taking effect. However, the practice was not over. As the teams prepared to simulate sprint qualifying on medium tires, the pressure rose again. It was the moment where Norris traditionally took advantage. Faster track, lighter car, ideal conditions to exploit his aggressive style. Piastri, however, stuck to his guns. In his first attempt with mediums, he clocked 1 minute and 9.998 seconds. It looked like he was going to close the session on a high. But Norris responded, as so often, with a final lap of surgical precision. 1 minute and 9.975 seconds, beating Oscar by 23 thousandths. Although he did not end the session on a high, Piastri had achieved much more than a good lap. He had managed to validate his technical work, confirm his psychological recovery, and force McLaren to look at him again as a legitimate threat within the team. In the garage, the reaction was measured but clear. Andrea Stella acknowledged the progress, highlighting that the problems on low-grip circuits are being addressed at the root. The atmosphere, however, was not one of absolute celebration. The team knows that the sprint and the main race will define whether this resurgence is sustained or just a temporary spark. But what did change is the internal perception. Piastri has shown that he can still lead, that he can still make a difference. He has once again been a strategic asset for McLaren, and that, in such a tight championship, could be what tips the balance in recent times. The practice session was not only an improvement in times. It was an emotionally transformative moment. Piastri got out of the car with an attitude not seen since the first half of the season. Serene, focused, aware that there is still a long way to go, but knowing that the direction is right. For the first time in weeks, the entire team, from engineers to strategists, felt that their second driver had stopped being a worry and was once again a hope. Free practice in Brazil was just a fragment of the weekend, but its implications transcend the stopwatches. Technically, it represents a turning point not only for Oscar Piastri but for McLaren as a whole. The team has shown that it is capable of surgically responding to a performance crisis that threatened to internally divide the duo that led it to the Constructors' title in 2024. The most important thing is that they have achieved what many teams fail to achieve in the middle of the season. Redirect a performance conflict towards a measurable solution on the track without breaking the trust between driver and structure. From a technical point of view, the solutions applied in Interlagos open new doors for the development of the MCL39. The fact that Piastri has regained competitiveness with changes as specific as the configuration of the differential and the adaptation of the power delivery map indicates that the car has a broader operating window than previously thought. This means that McLaren could explore new setup directions for other circuits with conditions similar to Austin and Mexico, where its second car was previously sidelined. From an emotional point of view, what happened in Interlagos also marks a break. The dynamic between teammates is one of the most complex elements to manage for any top team. At McLaren, the tensions were not public or declared, but there were clear signs. More distant communication, gestures in the garage, subtle priorities and strategies. That all changes when the performance balance is restored. Piastri, with this session, regains not only self-confidence, but also the internal respect that is earned with results. There is no more powerful way to be taken seriously again in Formula One than with lap times that speak for themselves. Beyond the 23 thousandths that separated him from Lando Norris at the end of practice, beyond the table that placed him second, what we saw was a driver reconnecting with his competitive essence. In the most demanding environment, with a car that had been his main adversary in previous events, on a circuit that does not forgive mistakes and under enormous media and sporting pressure, Piastri once again showed what he is made of. It's not just speed. It's character. It is intelligence. It is the ability to adapt. And that raises a fundamental question for anyone following this season closely. What is Oscar Piastri's true ceiling when the car is in his favor and confidence is back? Is he simply a luxury squire in a team that revolves around Lando Norris? Or are we, perhaps, at the beginning of a stage where McLaren's internal hierarchy begins to fracture? Leave it in the comments what you think about all this. Do you think Piastri has the mental, technical, and strategic tools to turn around the championship in recent times? Or do you think Norris' consistency and natural affinity for the car will keep him ahead?